Shalom and welcome to Simchat Yisrael. In this week's Besorah portion, Yeshua tells a story about a master who goes out early to hire laborers to work in his vineyard. But there is much work to be done, so he continues to go out throughout the day, and he hires men as the day goes on. Even when there is only 1 hour left in the day, he hires men to work. When the workday ends, he pays everyone the same wages, even the men who had only worked for an hour. The workers who had been there the whole day and had been sweating under the sun for 12 hours were angry that the workers who had barely had anything to do received the same pay as them, and they confronted the master. But the master tells them he has paid them exactly what he promised, and they have no reason to feel cheated. Unfortunately, this parable has been used to support the position of replacement theology, the idea that the church has replaced the Jews as the people of God, and that the Torah has been replaced by the new covenant. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel down below. The popular interpretation of this text goes like this. The master is God, the vineyard is the kingdom of heaven, the early complaining laborers are the Jews, and the late laborers are the Gentile Christians. What the typical interpretation of this parable tells us is that the Jews have been laboring in God's kingdom for a long time. They have been struggling under the weight of the Torah, working hard and sweating and miserable under all these unreasonable rules. But at the end of the day, God brings in all of these happy Christians who don't have to work hard at all. They aren't worried about all these laws, they just get to hang out in the shade and enjoy eating the grapes. At the end of the day, the Jews run to God complaining that the Gentiles are allowed to enter the kingdom of heaven even though they don't obey the Torah. But God tells them that they should just relax and be more like these happy Christians. I don't think this is what Yeshua was trying to communicate. There are some common mistakes that modern exegetes make when they interpret this parable, and if we can correct these mistakes, it casts this parable in a whole new light. The first mistake is assuming that laboring in the hot sun is a metaphor for living under Torah. Outsiders to Judaism take scriptures like Galatians 3:10 out of context. They read Paul saying, "All who rely on deeds of Torah are under a curse," and assume that the Torah must be an unbearable burden, something heavy and horrible and undesirable. They read this parable and assume that Jews must be hating every minute of being under the law. But that's not the relationship that Jews have with Torah. The book of Psalms describes the Torah as perfect, refreshing the soul, and wonderful truths. Psalm 119 says, "Oh, how I love your law." The Jews don't labor under Torah. Torah gives us life. Yeshua is the living fulfillment of the Torah. He would never teach that it was something evil and burdensome. That's an interpretation by people who are outsiders to Torah life, and their prejudices inform their reading of this parable. The second mistake is that they interpret the vineyard as the kingdom of heaven. Yeshua is evoking imagery that his audience will be very familiar with. He's quoting from the book of Isaiah, who taught his own parable of the vineyard. And in Isaiah's parable, he clearly states that the vineyard is the land and the people of Israel. This is a Jewish story directed towards and concerning the Jewish people. The vineyard is Israel, and all of the laborers, early and late, are Jews. The last big mistake is interpreting the early laborers as the Jews in general. The truth of the matter is that Yeshua was addressing a very specific group of Jews. Immediately preceding this parable, Yeshua is speaking with his disciples about the rewards for serving in God's kingdom. The disciples, who have given up everything to follow Yeshua, come to him and ask him what their reward for their faithful service will be. The parable of the workers in the vineyard is a direct response to the apostles' fears and anxieties. The apostles are the early laborers who have been with the master since the beginning. The apostles are the ones who suffer with Messiah and share the lonely road of service with him. They are the ones who will do the work, but it is the whole world who will benefit from their labor. Yeshua is preparing his disciples for the reality of what lies ahead, that God does not play favorites, and that he loves all of his workers the same. When you read this parable in its proper context, it tells a very different story. Not a story about foolish workers, but a story about a loving master. There are some who want to rename this story the parable of the generous employer. This isn't a story about Jews and Christians. It's not a story about hard workers and lazy slackers. It's not a story about those who've run a long race and those who have jumped in right at the end. It's a story about a God who wants everyone to have a place in his vineyard. A God who seeks us out wherever we are, who comes back for us again and again, who never gives up until everyone has been given a place in his kingdom. Shalom and thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe. And don't forget to visit simchatyisrael.org to learn more.